Hi, I'm Ron Chapman from the Chapman Law Group. Let's talk about healthcare fraud today. Healthcare fraud is a very broad topic, and there are many ways you can be accused of healthcare fraud by the federal government. One of the ways is overbilling for services that are rendered to Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, or private insurance companies. Another way would be receiving a kickback or some sort of bribe in exchange for referring people to a federal healthcare program. In addition, you can also commit healthcare fraud by performing medically unnecessary services that shouldn't have been performed in the first place or were performed in a way that weren't medically necessary or appropriate. The federal statutes in this arena and regulations are broad. CMS guidelines, which are used to determine whether or not healthcare fraud was committed, number in the hundreds of thousands of pages, and it's nearly impossible for a physician to comply with every single one of them. The only solution is to have a robust compliance program available at your practice in order to ensure that you're complying with guidelines. But what happens if you didn't have one in place? What happens if you've been billing a certain way and you realize that it might have been a mistake, or you're performing a service in a way that might be in violation of guidelines? Call Chapman Law Group today. Our attorneys will perform an in-depth investigation to understand the scope of the problem, get out in front of the problem, potentially report and pay back some small fine as opposed to receiving a federal indictment for healthcare fraud. Now, if it's too late and you're already facing government scrutiny for healthcare fraud, there are certain things that you can do in order to minimize the risk to your practice and keep yourself out of jail. The first thing is to contact a talented healthcare fraud attorney immediately. Our healthcare fraud team will show up, interview everybody at the practice, develop as much good evidence as possible, and defend the decision-making at your practice before the government even engages in scrutiny. If you find yourself the subject of a federal indictment for healthcare fraud, we do really good work in minimizing the loss amount, which is the main driver of prison time in healthcare fraud, and in many cases defending you at trial in order to keep yourself out of jail and keep the other people in your practice out of jail. Healthcare fraud is a very complex topic, and it's not something that should be handled by attorneys who don't know much about healthcare fraud. You need to contact attorneys who have advanced degrees in healthcare law, attorneys who have experience trying healthcare cases, attorneys who've been at the defense table on the other side of the prosecution before and have actually won. That's what Chapman Law Group brings to the table for you, your practice, and for your future to keep you out of trouble. If you're facing healthcare fraud charges or you're concerned you may not be in compliance with federal guidelines, contact us today. We'll give you a free consultation